Welcome to Wild West Love Chronicles. This time, I'm going to share a deeply touching and thrilling story. Let's listen closely and enjoy every moment together. The wind rolled low across the prairie, whispering through the dry grasses like a secret, too old to care if anyone heard. Morning light spilled down over the mesa, soft and gold, warming the dew on the fence posts and glinting off the rough wood of the McAllister barn. Inside the corral, a young figure in worn denim and a sun-bleached hat moved with practiced ease, looping a frayed rope around a skittish mare's neck. The horse snorted and kicked once, but the figure held fast, voice low and even. "Easy now, girl. Ain't no call for fussin'." The voice was low enough to pass. Just enough husk to it. Just enough flatness. A boy's voice, if you didn't look too close. But she wasn't a boy. Clara McAllister had learned to speak like her brother, walk like him, spit like him if she had to. She'd learned how to tuck her braid beneath her hat, how to bind herself flat with strips of linen, how to keep her chin down and her eyes colder than they felt. Around these parts, people didn't ask too many questions if you looked like you belonged, and she'd made damn sure she did. It had been nearly a year since the fever took Caleb. Her father never talked about it. Not the cough, not the sweating, not the burial beneath the lone cedar tree out past the dry creek. He simply stopped speaking much at all. Just grunted orders and drank more than before, let the leather in his hands go stiff and the porch go unswept. Clara didn't cry when Caleb died. Not because she didn't want to, but because there wasn't time. The ranch was barely hanging on, the cattle were restless, the fences sagged. And the men in town had started circling, like coyotes sniffing out a corpse. She knew what they saw. A widowed rancher with a daughter too pretty and too young to hold land on her own. So she put on Caleb's hat and his shirts. She deepened her voice and stopped smiling. She told her father she'd be Clay now, and he didn't argue. Just looked at her, real long and heavy, like he was watching her walk off a cliff. Then he nodded once, slow, and poured another drink. Now, most days started before the sun came up and ended long after it dipped below the hills. Clara fixed fences, shoveled stalls, rode the perimeter, and tried not to listen too hard to the whispers when she rode into town for feed. That McAllister boy sure keeps to himself. A little strange, that one. Don't talk much. Never seen him take his hat off, even at the church table. Let him whisper, as long as they didn't ask questions. By mid-morning, she'd already seen to the animals and fixed 2 boards in the eastern fence. Her hands were blistered and her throat dry, but the rhythm of the work kept her upright. She saddled her Mustang, Smoke, a wiry gray with an attitude worse than hers, and rode out toward the canyon rim. Her father hadn't spoken a word at breakfast, just grunted and gestured to the north trail before disappearing into the barn with a jug. The canyon was quiet, the way she liked it. Vultures wheeled high overhead, and the rocks below glittered with heat. She stopped now and then to check the traps, mostly empty, though one held a rabbit with a snapped leg. She put it out of its misery with a quick flick of the knife and slung it into her saddlebag. It'd make a decent stew, but then Smoke snorted hard and reared slightly, ears flattening. Clara stilled, muscles tightening. The horse stepped back, nostrils flaring. "Easy," she whispered, patting his neck. But he wasn't calming. She dismounted slowly, one hand on the reins, the other drifting toward the knife at her belt. Her boots crunched softly on the dusty earth as she moved toward the scrub ahead. The wind shifted, and she smelled it. Blood, sharp, metallic, fresh. A trail of it spattered the rocks near a split mesquite. Drops, then streaks. Something, or someone, had passed through here recently and left a mess behind. She crouched low, following the trail through the brush. Flies buzzed thick around a patch of dark soil, sticky and red. Her breath caught, and there, half hidden beneath a tumble of sage and rock, was a man. At first she thought he might already be dead. He wasn't moving, face turned to the side, shirt soaked through with blood. A black hat lay inches from his outstretched hand, and beside it, a revolver glinted in the sun. The gun gave her pause. So did the way he was dressed. Black duster, boots too clean, the kind of man who rode alone and left trouble behind him. But then he groaned. Clara's instinct screamed at her to turn around. Get on the horse and ride back to the ranch. Tell no one. Hide. Pretend she hadn't seen a damn thing. Instead, she crept closer, squatting beside him. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe in his early 30s, but worn deep from the sun. A cut ran across his temple, dried blood down his jaw. There was a wound high on his shoulder, maybe 2. Looked like he'd been shot and left for the buzzards. His eyes fluttered open. "Clay," he rasped. Clara stiffened. "What?" He tried to speak again, but only coughed, wet and hoarse. Blood bubbled on his lips. Clara swore under her breath. She looked back toward where she'd left Smoke. The cabin wasn't far, an old trapper's shelter her father had abandoned years ago. If she could get him there without dying in the process. She pressed 2 fingers to the man's neck. Pulse. Faint, but there. "Hell," she muttered. "You'd better be worth it." It took everything she had to lift him. He was dead weight, groaning low as she hoisted one arm over her shoulder and half-dragged, half-carried him toward the trees. She moved slow, careful to keep out of open view. Whoever had shot him might still be near. By the time she reached the cabin, sweat slicked her skin, and her arms trembled from the effort. She kicked the door open with her boot, half-carried him inside, and dropped him onto the cot. Dust rose from the sheets like ghosts. The place smelled of old wood and mouse droppings, but it was shelter. She found a bucket, filled it from the nearby stream, and began cutting away his shirt. The wounds were bad. One bullet had passed clean through his upper arm. The other, just under his ribs, was worse. Clara gritted her teeth. She didn't have the skills of a doctor, but she'd helped calves with worse. She boiled water, tore strips of her spare shirts for bandages, and used the whiskey from her saddlebag to clean the wounds. He screamed once, thrashing. She shoved a cloth between his teeth. "Bite," she said, voice flat. By sundown, he was still breathing. Feverish, but alive. Clara sat by the door, rifle in her lap, watching him. The fire crackled low, casting flickers of orange light over the floor. The man's chest rose and fell unevenly, but the bleeding had slowed. She didn't know who he was. An outlaw, maybe. A killer, even. There were wanted posters in the sheriff's office for men who looked like this one. Sharp jaw, mean eyes, that hollow look men carried when they'd lost too much. She should have left him, but she didn't. Something in her, something fierce and foolish, had chosen to keep him breathing. Maybe because she was tired of watching people die. Maybe because she saw something familiar in the way he clenched his fists in pain but didn't beg. She'd stay the night, watch him. If he lived, they'd figure out what came next. If he didn't. She glanced to the knife on the table. The shovel leaned near the wall. She'd done worse to keep her secret safe. Outside, the wind picked up again, whispering across the canyon. Smoke nickered softly in the dark, tethered to the porch. Inside, the girl no one saw and the man everyone feared were quiet, wrapped in firelight and silence. And so the story began, not with a kiss or a bullet, but a choice. A hand reached out in defiance of good sense, a rancher's daughter, disguised as a boy, and a man with blood on his hands. The fever took him hard. By morning, Jameson Cole was caught in its grip, body thrashing in the rough cot as sweat soaked through the bandages Clara had wrapped the night before. She'd hardly slept, sitting upright in a broken chair by the window, the rifle laid across her lap and her boots still on. She watched him fight ghosts in the firelight, mumbling half-sentences to people she couldn't see. Once he called out for Annabelle, his voice cracking like dry leather. Another time he muttered something about bullets and betrayal, his eyes wide but unseeing. Clara didn't respond. She just wrung out another cloth and pressed it to his forehead. Outside, the prairie sky shifted from black to the cool gray of dawn. A hawk cried far off across the canyon, circling high over the rim. The trees rustled soft in the breeze, and somewhere beyond them, Smoke gave a low snort. She'd have to check on him soon. But not yet. She studied the man in the cot. Now that he was still, not twisted in pain or shouting in sleep, he looked younger. Not soft, not by any measure. His jaw was square, unshaven, his arms lined with scars, old and new, but there was something worn down in the way his features settled when he wasn't guarded. Like a dog that'd been kicked too many times, bracing always for the next blow. It made her chest ache in a strange, unfamiliar way. She hated that. Clara got up, stretching the stiffness from her spine, and stoked the fire. She boiled water again, not because she needed to. She'd done the dressings hours ago, but because doing something with her hands helped her think. Helped her forget that she'd dragged a stranger into a place barely anyone knew existed. And if he turned out to be what she suspected, she might have just signed her own death warrant. She didn't even know his name yet. When she returned with fresh water, he was awake. Barely. His lips parted, dry and cracked, and his gaze met hers with a slow, searching look of someone who wasn't sure what world he was in. "Water," he croaked. She held the cup to his lips. He drank greedily, coughing once as it caught in his throat. "Slow down," she said, voice flat. He blinked up at her. You the one that dragged me here? Wasn't the coyotes?" A ghost of a smile touched his mouth. "Could have been." She sat back down in the chair, rifle across her lap again. He noticed it now, the way her hand stayed near the trigger. His eyes narrowed. "Not real trusting, are you?" "I don't know who you are. You had a gun beside you and blood on your hands. Trust don't come easy out here." "Fair." They stared at each other in the dim cabin, fire popping quietly between them. He tried to sit up, winced, and fell back against the pillow with a growl of pain. "You're lucky," Clara muttered. "Bullet missed anything vital. Other one tore clean through your arm. Lost a lot of blood, though." "Didn't feel lucky. No, I imagine not." A long silence. He shifted slightly, eyes scanning the dusty beams above him. "This a trapper's cabin?" "Used to be. My father's. Don't think anyone else remembers it's here." He nodded slowly. "What's your name, boy?" Her fingers tightened slightly on the rifle. "Clay." "Just Clay. That's right." Another pause. She could feel his eyes on her, weighing the voice, the build, the odd stillness. Men like him were trained to notice details, but he was still too weak to ask the right questions, or maybe too cautious. "Well, Clay, thank you. I reckon I owe you my life. You owe me nothing yet." He closed his eyes again, resting. For the first time, Clara felt the tension in her shoulders ease just slightly. His breath came slow, and even now, the worst of the fever might have passed. She stood, grabbed her hat, and stepped outside. The air smelled of sage and creek water. Birds chirped from the brush, and the sun was peeking over the hills, setting the rocks ablaze in orange. Smoke whinnied softly at her approach, tossing his head as she rubbed his neck. "Easy, boy," she whispered. She fed him from the saddlebag, checked his hooves, and turned back to the cabin. A rabbit darted across the clearing, and her hand went to her rifle out of habit, then lowered. She wasn't hungry enough to waste a shot. Inside, Jameson was asleep again. She took the moment to check the bandages, clean around the wounds, and cover him with the spare blanket. His skin was hot still, but not dangerously so. His hand twitched in his sleep. "Annabelle," he whispered again. Clara sat beside the fire. She didn't know why the name made something turn in her gut. 3 days passed. He slept through most of them. She hunted rabbits, gathered roots, and brought more water. She kept her hat low, her answers short, and never let her guard down. On the 4th day, he was strong enough to sit up. He watched her carefully now, asked questions. Where she was from, how she'd found him, why she was helping. She answered just enough to keep him steady, never offering more than she had to. He told her his name then. "Jameson Cole," he said, like it should mean something. It did. She didn't flinch, but her pulse quickened. She'd seen that name once before, tacked to a wall in the sheriff's office in Dry Creek, $50 bounty. Wanted for theft, arson, suspected murder. No photo, but a description. Scar on his chin. Black coat. Cold eyes. It fit. He watched her, like he knew what she was thinking. "You heard of me. I've heard of a lot of men." He smiled, humorless. "And most of them ain't worth remembering. You one of those?" "I used to be." Clara didn't answer. The fire crackled between them. Jameson shifted, wincing. "You're not like most boys," he said after a while. She tensed. "You're quiet, careful, you don't ask questions, and you move like somebody with secrets." "Maybe I am somebody with secrets." He nodded, like that made sense to him. Like he was used to people lying to stay alive. That night, he told her about the woman he lost. Not in detail, just enough to paint the grief in his voice. Her name was Annabelle. They'd been set to marry, once, before the fire, before the gunman, before Jameson had become the kind of man who couldn't go back. Clara listened without interrupting. She'd never been in love, but she knew what it meant to lose something you couldn't replace. When he was finished, she stood and added more wood to the fire. Then she said, "She must have been worth a lot to change you like that." Jameson stared at the flames. "She was." More silence. Clara didn't tell him about Caleb, or her father, or the lie she lived every day just to keep the wolves from her door. She didn't tell him that her real name was Clara, that she'd never known what it felt like to wear a dress and be safe at the same time. But she thought about it. The next morning, Jameson asked to help. "You shouldn't be moving much yet," she said. "I need to move. Need to feel something other than this cot and this damn ache in my ribs." She let him. He was slow, stiff, but determined. She let him feed smoke, then chop wood for the fire. His movements were clean, practiced. He knew work, even if it had been a while. They didn't talk much that day, just worked. By sundown, they sat on the porch steps together, watching the light fade across the canyon. "You ever shoot anyone, Clay?" he asked suddenly. She didn't look at him. "Only snakes. And once, a coyote trying to take one of our calves." "Ever been shot at?" She hesitated. "Not yet." "You should know then," he said, voice quiet. "When it happens, it ain't like in stories. You don't feel brave, just cold. And then nothing." She nodded. "Thanks for the warning." He glanced sideways at her. "You're not afraid of me." "I never said that. You don't act like it." She didn't answer. Later that night, as he lay back down on the cot, he said, almost too soft to hear, "I don't know what you are, Clay, but I'm glad you found me." Clara sat by the fire, listening to the wind outside. And for the first time since Caleb died, she didn't feel completely alone. The wind had teeth that morning. It bit at Clara's face as she rode hard across the ridge, smoke-gray clouds dragging their shadows across the prairie below. Her hat was pulled low, scarf high around her mouth, and her eyes stayed sharp, watching the lines of the land for anything out of place. She wasn't sure what she was looking for. Maybe hoof prints, maybe something worse. But the air was wrong today, and she'd learned long ago to listen to her instincts. She hadn't meant to be gone this long. The ranch needed repairs after last week's windstorm. 3 fences down, 1 goat missing, and her father still hadn't said more than 10 words in 3 days. He barely looked up from his chair anymore. The whiskey bottle clung to his hand like a second limb. When she told him she needed to check the north perimeter and head toward the canyon to refill supplies, he didn't answer. Just grunted and spit. That was fine. She preferred the silence. Jameson was back at the cabin. Stronger now. The bruises on his ribs were fading to green, the cut across his shoulder healing clean beneath fresh bandages. He still winced when he turned too fast, but his strength was coming back faster than she liked. His boots had dirt on them again, and she'd caught him once or twice outside, watching the tree line, hand twitching toward a missing weapon. She hadn't returned his gun, and he hadn't asked, but they both knew it hovered between them, quiet and heavy. He was smiling more lately, real smiles, the kind that showed in his eyes. She wasn't sure how she felt about that. 3 days ago, he'd asked her to show him how to rope a calf. She'd laughed in his face, not loud, but enough for him to smile like he'd won something. So she showed him, and he fumbled the throw, cursed at the rope, then grinned when she did it clean in one motion. "You ever think about not hiding?" he asked her that afternoon, wiping sweat from his brow. Clara froze, just for a second. "Hiding what?" she said, the words flat and careful. He looked at her long, too long, then shrugged and said nothing. She hadn't slept well since. Now, as she followed the winding trail back toward the cabin, the smell of wood smoke hit her nose. Too sharp, too much. Her stomach dropped. She kicked smoke into a gallop. When the trees parted, the clearing came into view, and her heart clenched. The cabin was still standing, smoke curling from the chimney, but the door was wide open. A second horse was tied to a post out front, big, black, and ugly, not Jameson's. She dismounted in one breath and pulled her rifle from the saddle. Voices. She crept through the brush, staying low. The voice inside was deep, slow, with a southern drawl thick as molasses. "Heard tell you'd gone and died, Cole." Jameson's voice followed, quieter, tight. "Ain't dead. Just resting." The deep voice laughed. "Well, you sure do know how to crawl into a hole, don't you? Hiding out with some kid in the woods? This him?" A pause. "Skinny. Looks soft." Clara's jaw locked, her finger curled on the trigger. "I don't want trouble, Luther," Jameson said. "I'm out, told you that." "And I told you don't get to walk away clean." Something shifted inside her. She stood up and stepped into the doorway, rifle raised. Luther turned. He was massive, all shoulders and sneer, beard down to his chest. One look at Clara, and he barked a laugh. "This the boy," he said. "Ain't even got enough meat on him to feed a dog." Jameson moved fast, faster than she expected. But Luther moved faster. In one motion, the big man had drawn his revolver and pressed it to Jameson's ribs. "Try anything," he growled, "and I paint this wall red." Clara's hands didn't shake. "Put the gun down." Luther's eyes slid to her, mocking. "That's cute." "You gonna shoot me, sweetheart?" Jameson's head snapped toward her, confusion in his face. But she didn't blink. "Put it down," she said again. Luther grinned. "You sound awful sweet for a—" She fired. The shot took him in the shoulder, and the revolver clattered to the floor as he screamed and staggered back, knocking into the table. Jameson lunged, tackling him into the corner. They wrestled hard, fists, knees, blood, but Clara couldn't get a clear shot. She aimed, ready to fire again, when Luther slammed his elbow into Jameson's face and shoved him back, then stumbled through the door, clutching his arm. Clara chased him halfway to his horse before he turned, face wild. "This ain't over," he spat. "You should have let him die." She didn't answer, just raised her rifle again. He mounted, kicked the beast hard, and vanished into the trees. By the time she got back inside, Jameson was sitting on the floor, blood running from his nose, lips split. She dropped the rifle and helped him up. "Who the hell was that?" she asked. He didn't meet her eyes. "Old friend. That friend's gonna bring more." "I know." They sat in silence. The fire cracked behind them, and the smell of blood thickened the air. "You shot him," Jameson said after a moment, tone unreadable. "He was gonna kill you." He laughed, short and bitter. "You didn't hesitate." Clara looked away. Didn't see the point. He reached out then, touched her wrist lightly. "You're not just some ranch kid, are you?" She pulled back. "Does it matter?" His eyes were sharp. It might. That night she didn't sleep at all. The cabin felt smaller than usual, and the fire too loud. Jameson cleaned his face in the basin and didn't speak much. His eyes followed her everywhere. When she took her hat off to wash her face, she felt his gaze catch. The next morning, before dawn, she packed supplies. "Where are we going?" he asked. "Into town." "That's a mistake. Then it's mine to make." He stood, sore and slow, and said, "I'm coming with you." She didn't argue. They rode together in silence. The trail to Dry Creek was long and winding, the town no bigger than a handful of buildings, and a crooked church bell. People watched when they rode in, but no one said much. Clara kept her hat low, her voice lower. They sold the rabbit pelts, bought salt, flour, some medicine. Jameson kept close, eyes scanning windows, alleys, doorways. At the general store, Clara felt it. Someone watching. A man by the saloon doorway. Thin, sharp face, wearing a coat too long for the heat. His eyes locked on Jameson. She grabbed his arm. "We need to go." He saw the man too. Too late. Gunfire broke out a second later. The town exploded into screams and dust. Clara ducked behind the trough, heart pounding, as bullets tore into the wood beside her. Jameson shoved her down, returning fire with a pistol he'd snatched from a fleeing deputy. 3 men, all guns, all aiming for him. They were bounty hunters. Clara moved before she thought, ran behind the stables, circled wide, and flanked the man near the church. Her shot dropped him before he saw her. She killed without thinking. Jameson took another out near the smithy, and the third ran for his horse. But Clara shot him too. When the dust cleared, her hands were shaking. Her face was pale. Jameson came to her, grabbed her shoulders. "You all right?" She looked at him, eyes too bright. "They were trying to kill you. I know." "You were right," she said softly. "It ain't like the stories." "No," he said. "It never is." They rode back in silence. That night, Jameson sat across from her at the fire. "You saved my life again." "You're welcome." He leaned forward. "You're not Clay." Her chest tightened. "I don't know who you are," he continued, "but you're not him." She stared at the flames, said nothing. "Who are you?" he asked. She lifted her eyes to his. And for the first time, didn't lie. "My name is Clara." He didn't speak for a long time, just nodded once, slow. "I thought so." Outside, the wind had changed again. But something between them stayed still, quiet and dangerous. And neither of them would ever be the same. They didn't speak much after that night. Clara had expected Jameson to lash out, expected 1,000 questions or bitter accusations, but none came. The name slipped from him once in passing, when he thanked her for stitching the wound on his arm after they returned from Dry Creek. "Thanks, Clara." It had landed soft, almost tender, as if he'd known it all along and had just been waiting for her to say it herself. Still, something cracked open between them. He looked at her differently now. Not just like a savior or a ranch hand, and certainly not like a boy. The way his eyes lingered said more than his mouth ever would. When she passed tools to him during repairs, or when she saddled Smoke in the early morning haze, she felt the heat of his gaze settle between her shoulder blades. It unnerved her more than gunfire. And when he smiled at her, truly smiled, Clara felt like her disguise had never existed at all. They fell into a rhythm. Days fixing fence posts, rebuilding the old shed out back, restocking supplies they could carry on foot in case the trail into town became too dangerous. Luther's words still echoed in her ears. "This ain't over." Clara knew that kind of man didn't bluff, and the quiet days that followed felt like kindling waiting on a match. Jameson took to splitting logs out front near the edge of the tree line. She watched from the porch one evening as he lifted the axe again and again, sweat gleaming down his back, the cords of his muscles flexing with every swing. The sun was low, painting the sky orange and copper, the air thick with pine smoke and silence. "You sure you're healed enough to be doing that?" she asked finally. Jameson looked over his shoulder. "You questioning my manhood?" She raised an eyebrow. "I'm questioning your brains." He laughed and set the axe down, wiping his hands on his jeans as he walked over. "And here I thought I was finally earning your approval." She shifted, suddenly aware of how small the space between them had become. "You earned it the day you stopped reaching for a gun every time I turned my back." "Trust is a rare thing," he said. "So is honesty." He nodded, something clouding his expression. "That why you didn't tell me sooner?" Clara looked away, gaze drifting to the fading light behind the trees. "I didn't think you'd believe me, or worse, that you would." Jameson was quiet for a moment. Then, I've done worse than pretending to be someone I'm not." She looked at him, really looked, and found no judgment in his eyes, only understanding. But before either of them could speak again, a shrill whistle pierced the air. Then, the unmistakable echo of hooves. Jameson spun toward the tree line. Clara was already reaching for the rifle by the door. It wasn't one rider, it was 5. They came fast, coats flapping like wings, rifles drawn, dust rising behind them in a burning trail. One of them, Luther, rode at the front, his shoulder bandaged but his sneer intact. "Well," he shouted, reining in just short of the clearing. "Didn't think we'd find you both out in the open like this." Jameson stepped forward. "You don't have to do this, Luther." "I think I do. Price on your head's gone up. And now I hear you've got a little helper worth even more." His eyes cut to Clara, then down to her chest, where the loose shirt she wore no longer did much to hide her figure. "Didn't expect your boy to be so pretty under all that dirt," he said with a leer. Clara cocked her rifle. "You can die with that smile on your face if you'd like." Luther laughed. "I like her. Shame about what's coming." Clara barely had time to move before the shooting started. Jameson tackled her down the porch steps just as bullets tore into the wood behind them, the air filled with thunder and smoke. Clara hit the dirt, rolled, and fired from behind the water trough. One shot clipped a rider, sending him reeling sideways. Another shattered the lantern hanging near the cabin, flames licking up the wall. Jameson returned fire beside her, movements sharp and smooth. He dropped one of the men by the shed, then ducked low as a bullet whizzed past his ear. "We've got to split them!" Clara shouted. Jameson nodded and bolted for the barn. Clara covered him, squeezing off shots until her chamber clicked empty. She ducked behind the wheelbarrow, reloading as splinters flew past her head. A scream rang out. One of the horses bucked wildly as its rider fell, blood arcing through the air. Luther's voice bellowed above the chaos. "You're dead, Cole, and the girl too!" Jameson burst from the barn with the shotgun Clara had stashed in the hay weeks ago. He fired once, wide blast, and sent 2 more riders scattering. But Luther stayed mounted, eyes locked on Clara as he urged his horse forward through the firelight. She saw the pistol rise. She didn't think, just moved. The bullet caught her shoulder. Pain flared, white-hot, and she fell backward, hitting the dirt hard. "No!" Jameson screamed. He ran, crossed the clearing in seconds, and dove between her and Luther's next shot. He fired blind, the blast catching Luther in the thigh. The horse reared, Luther howled, and both went down in a mess of limbs and screaming. Then silence. Only smoke, flames, and the soft groaning of the wounded remained. Jameson dropped beside Clara. Blood poured from her shoulder, warm and steady. His hands trembled as he pressed cloth to the wound. "Stay with me," he whispered. "Clara, don't go." She blinked, vision fuzzy, her breath shallow, not planning on it. He choked out a laugh, but it broke halfway. When she woke, the fire was out. She was in the cot. The cabin smelled of burnt wood and blood. Jameson sat beside her, shirt torn, face bruised, one hand wrapped tight in a stained bandage. He met her gaze and smiled. "You're alive." She nodded, voice dry. "So are you. We won." She stared at him. "How many?" "3 dead. 1 ran off. Luther's not walking again." She let out a slow breath. "Good." Silence hung between them for a long moment. Then Jameson said, soft, "You saved my life again." Clara turned her head toward him. "You saved mine." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. She didn't stop him this time. His hand lingered. His voice dropped lower. "You scare the hell out of me, Clara McAllister." She smiled, eyes half-lidded. "Good. Keep you sharp." He leaned closer, and for a second, the world paused. His lips brushed hers, feather soft, a whisper of a kiss more promise than passion. When he pulled back, her eyes were still closed. She whispered, "Took you long enough." He laughed again, real and full this time. "Stubborn woman. Guilty." He stood, walking to the door, where dawn was creeping over the horizon. "You know this isn't over," he said. "More will come, as long as there's a price on my head." She nodded. "Then we end it." He looked back. "How?" "I ride with you." His eyes searched hers. "You sure?" She winced as she sat up, pain shooting through her arm. "You owe me more than a debt, Jameson Cole. Time to pay it back." He nodded once, and together they stepped into the morning. The trail was dust and silence for the first half of the journey. Clara rode ahead, her shoulder tightly bandaged beneath her shirt, the wound raw but mended. Jameson rode behind her, his shotgun tied across his back, eyes always scanning the hills like a man expecting the past to come riding down on him in the next breath. They didn't speak much, not because there wasn't anything to say, but because too much had already been said without words. The land was changing. No longer the high plains and mesquite scrub of her father's ranch, but deeper, darker country, rolling hills stitched with pine and rivers that ran clear and cold. They passed through 2 towns, didn't stop in either. The wanted posters were still up in some windows. The name Jameson Cole printed in black ink beside an old, smudged sketch. $50. 50 pieces of silver. She knew what he planned to do. She'd known before they saddled the horses and rode east. The day after the shootout, he'd stood on the porch, hands on the rail, blood drying on his sleeves. She came up beside him, and he didn't look away when he said it. "I'm turning myself in." She didn't flinch, just nodded. "Figured. It's the only way to stop the killing. You think they'll show mercy?" "No." His voice was dry. "But I'll stand in front of a judge before I let another man die on my behalf." She studied him, the hard line of his jaw, the cuts healing on his brow. "And if they hang you?" He looked at her then. "Then at least it ends with my choice." Now, 2 days into the ride, the weight of that decision hung between them like a storm cloud. Clara didn't know how to stop him, and part of her didn't want to, because she understood. That night, they camped beneath a thicket of cottonwoods near the river. The fire was small, the night cold. Jameson laid out his bedroll beside hers, but not too close. Not yet. He stared into the flames while she cleaned her wound, wincing with each touch. "You sure you're up for this?" he asked. "I didn't come all this way to fall apart at the end." He smiled faintly. "That's what I'm afraid of." She looked at him, long and hard. "What happened to Annabelle?" He didn't answer at first. The fire popped between them. "I told you she was killed," he said finally. "That much is true. But I didn't tell you why." Clara waited. "She was a schoolteacher," he said. "Back east, we were engaged. I got mixed up with some men. Gamblers mostly. Small-time thieves. I thought I was smarter than them. Thought I could play both sides. They caught me trying to leave. Burned her house down while she was sleeping." Clara's breath caught. "I shot the man who gave the order. Shot him in the street in broad daylight. Ran west after that. Never stopped running." She reached out, fingers brushing his wrist. "You didn't kill her, Jameson. I brought it on her. You were trying to get out." "Too late." Silence again. Then, softly, she said, "You don't have to die for it." He looked at her. "No, but maybe I need to." She didn't speak again, just laid back on the bedroll and watched the stars. They reached Laramie on the 4th day. The town was quiet, snow in the shadows even though it was only early spring. Clara's breath curled in the air as they rode into the main street, hooves loud on the boards. People turned to look. Some stared. Some looked away too fast. The sheriff's office sat at the end of the row, a squat brick building with a barred window and a lantern flickering beside the door. Jameson dismounted first, tied his reins, and turned to her. "This is where it ends," he said. She dismounted too. "No, this is where it starts." Inside, the sheriff stood behind the desk, reading a paper. A mustached man with a gray hat and tired eyes. He looked up. Jameson removed his hat. "Name's Jameson Cole. I'm here to surrender myself." The sheriff didn't move at first. Then he folded the paper, stood slowly, and reached for his cuffs. Clara stepped forward. "He's turning himself in willingly." "That right?" the sheriff said. "Yes, and you should know. He saved my life. More than once." The sheriff looked at Jameson. "You know they've been hunting you for 4 years." "I know. Judge rides in Friday. I'll wait." He was led to the cell without protest. Clara followed until the bars stood between them. "I'll speak for you," she said. He shook his head. "Don't waste your breath." "It's mine to waste." She reached through the bars, took his hand. He gripped it tight, then let go. For the next 2 days, she stayed in town. She spoke with the judge when he arrived. Told him everything. How she found Jameson, how he'd saved her, how he'd tried to change, how he turned himself in, how he could have run but didn't. The trial was swift. The charges were many. The judge listened. So did the jury. On the 3rd day, the verdict came. Guilty. Sentenced to 10 years. Clara's legs nearly gave out, but Jameson looked almost relieved. When she visited his cell that night, he looked through the bars and said, "I thought they'd hang me." "So did I." He smiled. "Then I guess we both get to be surprised." She stared at him. "You really gonna sit in here for 10 years? "I'll sit as long as it takes to pay for what I did." Clara swallowed hard. "I'll wait." His eyes widened. "Don't." "I will. I'm not worth it." "Yes, you are." He stepped to the bars. "You don't owe me anything, Clara." She stepped closer. "This isn't about a debt." And then she kissed him. Through the bars, hands on his face, soft and sure. "I love you," she whispered. He rested his forehead against hers. "God help me. I love you too." A year passed. She worked the ranch again. Sold cattle. Built the fences higher. Her father died quietly in his sleep that summer, and Clara buried him next to Caleb beneath the cedar. She didn't cry, just laid a hand on the earth and whispered goodbye. Letters came once a month, always from the same place, always signed, "Yours, J." She wrote back every time. On the day she received a letter marked "Parole Granted," she fell to her knees in the kitchen, the envelope trembling in her hands. When he came back, it was just past spring. He rode up the road slow, one hand on the reins, the other clutching the brim of his hat. His hair was longer, his coat worn, but his eyes were the same. Clara stood on the porch, arms crossed, heart galloping behind her ribs. He stopped at the gate. "I told you I'd come back." She walked down the steps, boots crunching in the dirt. "And I told you I'd wait." Jameson smiled. She stepped into his arms, and this time, they didn't let go. In the dust and danger of the untamed frontier, Clara McAllister and Jameson Cole proved that love isn't always born in soft places. It rises from fire, forged in truth, sacrifice, and second chances. A rancher's daughter who refused to be defined by the world's rules, and a gunman who chose redemption over revenge, found something far greater than freedom. They found each other. And in the Wild West, that kind of love is legend. If this story stirred your heart and kept you riding until the very last word, don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Love Chronicles, where every tale is packed with grit, romance, and unforgettable characters. Saddle up and hit that bell so you never miss the next ride into the wild heart of the West.